You're just blinding it.
Blinding it. Today is Friday, September 9th, 2011. My name is Caitlin McKenna, and I'm interviewing George Epp for the Maria Rogers Oral History Program. George Epp was Sheriff of Boulder County from 1990 to 2003, and he has lived in Boulder County since
1951.
Could you tell me when and where you were born, please?
Yeah, I was born in Midland, Michigan in 1947. My family came to Boulder when I was 4 in 1951.
Could you tell me a little bit about growing up in Boulder, where you lived, sorts of things you did?
Yeah, we lived at 1676 Sunset, which is the hill that's just east of Casey Junior High, or now Casey Middle School. I went to Whittier Elementary from kindergarten through 6th grade, and then Casey Junior High. Boulder High, graduated in 65, and then I went on to the University of Colorado, and it took me a little bit longer, but I got out of there in 1971 with a bachelor's degree in sociology.
And how did you get into the Sheriff's Department?
Well, a number of factors. I had a lot of friends who were in law enforcement. When I was in college, I worked as a mechanic at a motorcycle shop to work my way through college. And one of the owners of the shop was a Boulder police officer, a guy named Al Staley. And a lot of the Boulder cops bought motorcycles from us. I worked on their motorcycles. I also had two great uncles who had been sheriffs. One was later an FBI agent in Michigan and in Wisconsin. And I had an interest in law enforcement from it looked like it could be fun. I liked to drive fast and thought I could maybe get less tickets if I were the one in the patrol car rather than the one getting pulled over. I also thought it would be a job where I could do something useful and be constructive to society. So, all that together.
Could you tell me a little bit about your pathway to becoming sheriff once you were in law enforcement?
Yeah, I started with the Sheriff's Department in 1972, year after I got out of college. I worked for a year in a little less than a year in an old mine up in Nederland, north of Nederland, an old tungsten mine where we were trying to reclaim some of the leftover tungsten. And had an application in with the Sheriff's Department and got hired in 72. I first worked in the old jail, which was in the what's now the west wing of the county courthouse. I went to work on the graveyard shift. They gave me a badge and I had to bring my own gun and no training, just show up and go to work and they'll tell you what to do. A lot different than what it is today. But, after a couple of months of that, the department decided they would start an academy, and it was really the time when law enforcement academies were pretty much of a new thing. There was no certification process for peace officers in Colorado at the time. We just got hired and went to work. So we did that first academy, and it was an interesting time in the sheriff's office because they'd lost right after I started in I guess around the 1st of January of 1973, about a third of the deputies quit and went to work for the Boulder Police Department. The police department had a big budget increase and was hiring, and they hired away a whole bunch of the sheriff's office staff. The sheriff's office had been through a lot of turmoil. It was much, much smaller than it is now, but anyway, that loss of all those deputies was a big blow, and so they came up with a plan. Brad Leach, who was the relatively new sheriff, he'd been elected when he was 29 years old. He and his staff put together a plan to take the remaining staff and put them on 12-hour shifts and then hire a bunch of people and put them through this academy that they would have to write all the curriculum for and develop all the instructors for and find a place to hold it and get everything that you needed to support an academy. So they did that, pulled it off. I was in the academy and graduated, and then there was no such thing as field training back then. The idea of field training was to put two rookies together in a patrol car because they didn't have enough senior officers to train us. So that was quite exciting. We probably made an awful lot of mistakes.
Do you have any fun stories from when there were two rookies in a patrol car?
Oh, I don't know. Let's see. You know, I remember going to an assault call at a trailer park north of town, and we didn't really know what to do. One guy had his face beaten to a pulp, but another guy had done most of the damage. But there was some allegation that the guy who had been beaten up had caused it. So we just brought everybody to jail. Another time, you know, I was 25 years old at the time, and I, you know, didn't have a lot of experience in the world. We got a call to a house out near Niwot where some kids, juveniles, were having a party and drinking, and went out there and tried to get the parents to come down to take charge of this, and the mom of one of these kids finally showed up 2 hours after we called them, and she was drunk, and I started lecturing her on how to be a good parent, and she hauled off and slugged me right in the chin. I mean, it didn't hurt, it bounced off, but so we took her to jail. Yeah, it was a pretty wild time. Anyway, I was a patrol officer for less than a year, and the department, it was in turmoil. There was a lot of turnover, a lot of vacancies, and they made me a detective. From the time I'd started as a jailer till the time I became a detective was less than a year. Might have been about 9 or 10 months. So I loved that. Wild times. There was, you know, there's probably quite a bit more violent crime then than there was now. So we had lots of exciting experiences. There was quite a bit of drug trade in Boulder, cocaine, heroin. There was a big heroin problem, and murders. I got to have my first murder case when I had less than 2 years in the department as a detective to handle by myself. It was a shooting at the Pioneer Inn in Nederland, and Nederland had a town marshal, but when this call went out, he disappeared, and we got to handle it. Arrested a guy named Roy Morgan for walking into the bar and pumping about 4 shots into a guy that had disrespected him. But we arrested him and were able to convict him. He tried to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, but it didn't work. Had some experiences taken. I had to drive Roy down to the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Colorado Medical Center so he could get examined by Dr. John McDonald, who was at that time the premier forensic psychiatrist in this part of the country. This is, I don't know if this is a funny story, but one time Roy and I were coming back from Denver on the turnpike, and we're coming up to Broomfield. Roy's on the passenger side, and he kept trying to, I was suspicious that he kept trying to make me think he was crazy, because, you know, that was his defense, that he was crazy. He said, "George," he called me George, I called him Roy. He said, George, you see that giraffe over there? I said, what? What are you trying to pull? I didn't see any giraffe. Next trip, he's about the same place. He says, George, you see that giraffe over there? And I look over, and there was this taxidermy shop that had put a full-size giraffe on the roofs. Jonas Taxidermy. Anyway, he didn't get off on his not guilty by reason of insanity. So anyway, following my career, I was promoted to detective sergeant in 1976 and stayed in that position until 78, and then I was promoted to lieutenant, and I went back to the patrol division as a lieutenant for 3 or 4 years, and then promoted to captain and was put in charge of detectives, and did that until 86, from 82 to 86, and then back to patrol as a captain until 89, and 89 I went to the jail division, ran the jail division for 2 years before I ran for sheriff. And Brad decided to step down. He was burned out on being the sheriff in 1990, and I ran for sheriff and had a bizarre campaign with a guy who had no law enforcement experience, but was, thought we ought to put all the inmates in halfway houses and could treat people, and that would solve all the problems. He didn't know anything about all the other sheriff's responsibilities like search and rescue or wildfire, but he knew we could treat these criminals. So actually, it was a Democratic primary, and it wasn't real close. I think it was like 60% to 40% in the primary, but it was my baptism in fire for politics. And I had a Republican opponent in the general election named Cherry Emerson, who was a little bit goofy. So that wasn't a big deal either. So that's how I got to be sheriff.
What was it like going from being sort of a law enforcement, career-minded professional into this political, melee?
Well, I've been involved in politics to some degree since I was a teenager. I was a vice president of Teen Dems in Boulder High School, and I've been a precinct committee person and volunteered with in politics. Worked on Brad's campaigns. So it wasn't all brand new to me. The process I was familiar with, and I had a lot of contacts, friends, that sort of thing in politics. So I had some people to help me. Being the one, the one on the spot was brand new, and that was terrifying and stressful. It was hard on my family too.
So you talked a little bit about the sheriff's responsibilities that some of the others that were campaigning for sheriff maybe didn't understand.
Yeah.
Could you go into the responsibilities of the sheriff?
Sure. Yeah. So in Colorado, sheriffs are they're in charge of law enforcement in the county, and municipalities have overlapping authority within the municipalities, but sheriffs actually have jurisdiction to enforce state laws in the cities as well, and usually don't exercise it, but sometimes they do. So there's law enforcement. According to Colorado statute, the sheriff is the fire warden for the county and is charged with suppressing wildland fires. The sheriff is responsible for coordinating search and rescue, running the county jail, serving civil process, and in Boulder, running a public safety communications center, coordinating the ambulance service. There's probably a couple others I don't remember, but it's a lot more than just being a cop, a street cop, and that's one of the things that drew me to the job originally, and I continued to enjoy during my tenure, because You never get bored.
And what sort of experience did you have with those, emergency management, wildland fire management types of responsibilities prior to becoming sheriff when you were working with the sheriff's department?
Yeah. When I was a kid growing up here, we didn't really have many fires in Boulder County. It was a pretty quiet period from, the 50s through up into the early 70s. And the first big fire I remember was the Gold Hill Fire, which was 1974, maybe 75, something like that. And that was really the first major incident that the Boulder Sheriff's Office and the fire departments in the county had been called on to handle during the tenure of everybody that was working there. And it was just chaotic. The coordination was a mess. It was a wonder the whole mountains from Gold Hill to Boulder didn't burn down, because there was no system to coordinate. People were talking over each other all the time on the radio. You couldn't get through on any of the radio channels. The organization of the communication system didn't facilitate the management of a major incident. The people's roles were unclear. The role of the sheriff versus the volunteer fire departments were murky. And Brad was much more in the thick of this thing than I was, and he can probably give a lot better narrative of what was so messed up. But thank God the fire got put out and people regrouped and said, we've got to figure out a way to handle these things in a better manner than we did in this one. And so Brad hired a guy named Don Van Wee, who was a really smart guy who lives up near, at that time, lived up near Gold Hill and been involved with the fire department. And what did we call it? We called him the fire liaison. Fire liaison. It got shortened to fire liaison. And then he had another guy working for him named Dan Mudd, who last I heard was a division chief with the Longmont Fire Department. And we worked with the Forest Service, because the Forest Service had a lot of depth and breadth of experience with wildland fire, a lot of institutionalized systems to help them. We learned about the incident command system. We sent some folks out to California to spend time with the California Division of Forestry to learn, because they were more experienced and had things down a little better. Brought training to our staff, myself included, on the incident command system, or ICS as we called it then. And then applied the training and developed our own incident management team here. So by the time, I think the next big fire I remember was the Comforter Mountain Fire, which was in 1976. We did a lot better job, and the communications part of it was a big piece. So we got some additional radio frequencies so that we could have tactical channels for the firefighters to use to talk to each other. More tactical frequencies for the cops to use, command channels, that sort of thing. The kind of the basis of what exists today in terms of a communications network, and gave people a lot of training on how to use the radios to communicate more effectively, and how to establish a command structure that was able to identify objectives and develop plans and execute them. So, yeah, I got to be part of that, and in '88, when I was the patrol captain in the Beaver Lake Fire, kind of by default, I ended up being the incident commander on that fire. It was a pretty good-sized fire. I think actually today might be the anniversary date of that fire. I think it was September 9th, 1988. If I could be off a date, it might have been the 7th, I don't know.
Yeah, I can't remember. I'm going to check though.
Okay, close. So here's the deal. I'm sitting at the time I was the patrol commander. Captain was the title we used then. And I'm sitting in my office, and we'd run out of space at the Justice Center at 6th and Canyon, where we were all moved 10 years earlier. Ran out of space there, so the patrol division was in some rented office space out in Gun Barrel, out on Lookout Road. Lookout, I don't know, one of those. And I heard the tone go off on the radio calling the fire department. So I looked out the window and I could see the smoke from my window from, 20 miles away. It was a very hot, probably somewhere in the 90-degree day, and windy with a strong wind coming out of the west. Low humidity, probably less than 10% humidity. And I looked at, I think I had lieutenant or somebody else was in the office with me, and he said, "Oh, this looks like a bad one." It's, and you could hear from the Indian Peaks or ward firefighters who were responding that it looked even worse up close. So I jumped in my car and headed up there, lights and siren, and got to what had been established as a command post. Ernie Little, who was our sheriff's office guy then, was there as well, and some people from the Forest Service, and we began to put together a plan of what we were going to do. The fire was just raging. There wasn't, all we could do at the time was just stay out of the way, but as time went on, Shelley Nolde, who was the district ranger for the Forest Service, got there. And we talked to her, and while we were there, another fire broke out in Left Hand Canyon, which I guess was called the Left Hand Fire. I don't know. That's what I think it was called. And that one, same conditions, obviously. This was a left-hand fire, was at lower elevation. We had ordered a incident management team from the Forest Service, which would have been coming probably out of, I don't remember where they were coming from. But because the left-hand fire was at lower elevation where things were even drier, and there was more threat to more infrastructure, the incident management team got diverted to the left-hand fire. And Shelley and I were left to be in charge of the Beaver Lake Fire, or the Beav as we called it. So we had some resources coming. We had some hot shot crews. I think we had one Indian crew from South Dakota that was coming. And as many of the local resources as could be spared from down in Left Hand. So darkness started to come, and the fire behavior started to slow down a little bit. I got together with Ernie Little and somebody else, I can't remember who it was, and we talked about what we could do at night, because we'd gotten a weather forecast that said that the winds the winds were going to die down overnight, but that the winds the next day were forecast to be 40 to 50 miles an hour. The fire was getting close to Highway 72, the peak-to-peak highway at that time. So, in those days, firefighters did not work at night. Mostly it was considered dangerous, and they just worked in the daytime. It was just the tradition. But we sat down, and I said, the only way we're going to keep this fire from jumping the peak-to-peak is if we get together a good night plan, and we get as much line as we can in front of this fire before those winds pick up in the morning. So we got all of these, as many of our hand crews as we could to work on it. We got a bulldozer from the county and built as much line as we could. west of the peak to peak. And the next day, the winds came and our lines held. And the left-hand fire blew up on them, but we were able to keep the Beaver Lake Fire from spreading beyond our lines. So I was proud of that.
And then did you also work on the Black Tiger Fire?
Yeah, that was the next year. That was July '89, and it was started on a Sunday, maybe it's July 9th. And 9's a bad number, I guess, for those things. But it was another 90, 100-degree day, windy, low humidity, you know, just the kind of perfect day for a big fire. And my wife and I were out in the backyard with our kids, and they had a little baby pool. Our kids were like 1 and 2 at the time. And we were splashing around with them in the pool, and I had my pager on. My pager went off, and I looked up and I saw this huge column of black smoke coming up from the Sugarloaf area. And said goodbye to everybody. I didn't see them for 3 days. I headed up there and got to where the command post was. Ruth Ravenel was the Sugarloaf fire chief, and the command post was at that Sunnyside area, just below where the fire started. Larry Stern, who was in charge of our wildfire unit at that time, was there, and we had our new command post bus, and we got in there and sat down, and we're looking at maps and looking at this thing. The fire's just taken off up the Black Tiger Gulch, and there's no stopping it. The fuels were 50-year-old trees that were about 2 inches in diameter and about 3 inches apart, and it just was going like crazy. But anyhow, the Sugarloaf people had called it the Sunnyside Fire. And I looked up at it. This ain't no damn Sunnyside Fire. Look at the map. Let's find a different name for this fire. So saw that it was Black Tiger Gulch, and that's a good name for this fire.
So you named the Black Tiger Fire?
Well, yeah, we changed. The Sunnyside wasn't working.
Too happy.
Yeah, it was not a happy fire. 44 homes burned, and almost all of those within the first couple of hours. And the fire really didn't stop until we got a cold front with rain that came in and cooled everything down. And we learned a lot about recovery from that one, because we had all these people who had lost their homes, and just tragedy for all those folks. Thank God there was no loss of life. I think there were 1 or 2 people that were hurt, but not hurt badly, including the husband of a woman I went to school with. Her husband was hurt in the fire. But we hadn't seen that kind of devastation around here. It was all new. So after the fire was out, and we got the overhead teams in, got all that kind of help, but after the fire was out, we worked as hard as we could to help the folks who had lost their homes. We contracted with some vendors to haul the junk cars. How many cars? There was a lot of cars that were burned. Haul those out. We created a central point for junk. We closed the area off, made it residents only. I don't know if that was legal or not, but we did. And then, we sat back and watched as some people argued about what kind of grass seed to plant in the reseeding effort. And it was kind of, some of our folks thought that was kind of weird, and I thought it was kind of refreshing that people were thinking about that kind of thing. So it was another tough time. We learned a lot, but we were also able to apply a lot of the learning that had gone on before, so that could have been a lot worse. could have gotten people hurt or killed, and could have lost more. And the effort, even though the first couple hours of something like that are inevitably chaos, we were able to use the training and the systems that we had to manage it about as efficiently as I think could have been done.
So when you became sheriff, did you find that your experiences fighting fires alongside volunteer fire departments in the mountains strengthened your relationships to the mountain communities at all?
Say that again.
So when you became sheriff, did you find that because you had worked with a lot of the volunteer fire departments in the areas, did that have any effect on your relationships with those communities as sheriff?
Oh yeah, I had a lot of friends. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, and I'd lived in the mountains too. My wife and I lived up in Boulder Heights until our kids came along. And so I had a lot of friends up there. So it was good relationships. And I had a lot of respect for those people. And I worked well with them. I had people I could call in virtually any part of the mountains or the plains of the county that, if a problem came up that I didn't know how to deal with it, I had people I could contact to help me out.
Were there specific mountain communities that required more oversight than others?
Well, there were specific communities that did not want oversight. Ward is a kind of a world unto itself. There's one Ward story that I've got to tell you about. This was early 70s kind of thing. And there was a guy named Jim Smith, not the Jim Smith who's worked for the Sheriff's Department recently, but the Jim Smith the first, who was a sergeant, big, tall, blonde-headed guy, been around Boulder forever, knew all kinds of people. But he was going on some kind of a call in the mountains, or was going to meet somebody or something. He was going through Ward, and he came up on the radio and he said, 523, that was his radio number. He said, 523, go ahead. 523, I've been stopped for speeding in Ward by some hippie, who was the town marshal. And 523, they're taking me to the town hall to post bond. So there's like every sheriff's car in the county is headed for Ward at this point.
What did you do?
Rescue Jim. Well, there was a lot of talking done and all that. Well, no, he shouldn't have been going that fast. Well, if he was on he should have had his emergency light. Yeah, okay, well, we all got to get along. Anyway, Ward's a unique community, independent-minded. Some people will talk about the fact that there's a drug culture up there, and there's certainly a bunch of that. I was fortunate to have kind of an in with people in Ward. A buddy of mine that I'd gone to high school with, his family had a cabin there, and after he graduated, he moved up there, so he was one of the locals, and we were friends. But I've always got along pretty well with the people in Ward. I mean, you treat them with respect, and they treated you with respect. And on the Beaver Lake Fire and the Black Tiger Fire both, and some others, their fire department, the guys that were on those fires were incredibly hard workers and very effective. And whether they were high or not, while they were doing it, I do not want to know. But they were, and I let them know that I respected their ability to work hard. So got along fine with them.
What emergency or law enforcement cases stick out in your mind during your tenure with the Sheriff's Department?
Well, of course, those fires, those two big fires that, there was the Walker Ranch fire in 2000 was another one that was really the biggest fire that occurred while I was sheriff. We had a another fairly quiet spell from 1990 up until 2000, and then fires got a lot more active 2000, 2001, 2002, mostly a function of climate probably. There were a number of murder cases I worked on that stick in my mind, usually the ones that involved kids. Helpless victims are the ones that and the ones you can't solve are the ones that haunt you. I mean, I still think about them. There's one case in particular. A little 7-year-old girl was kidnapped from elementary school in Thornton and found her body in just east of Nederland, 1984, 85, when I was the detective captain, and never solved. We had an idea who did it, but we just didn't have any evidence to file, and nothing other than speculation as who had done it. And it was a tough one. You know, there's a lot of other things besides cases. Being sheriff in a county like this, the jail is a big part of what you do. And the whole time I was sheriff, we struggled with crowding in the jail and what to do with it and why is it crowded. And so I spent a lot of time on that issue. I helped develop a number of programs to address those things, and I'm proudest of some of those kinds of things.
Did they build the new jail while you were sheriff? The current jail?
No, that one was finished in '88. While I was the patrol captain, and then I got assigned to run that as the captain about a year after it opened.
What were some of the major differences between, I mean, it sounds like when you first started working in the jail, it was just trying to get whoever could work there to come in.
Yeah.
And that sounds like it was much more regimented by the end of it. Could you tell me a little bit about the changes?
Yeah, well, you know, when I first started, we had, can't remember exactly, but we only had about 30 or 40 beds in the jail. And it was pretty full, and we were trying to figure out how to get some relief for that. And that was in the early 70s. And you know, a starting jail deputy didn't get any training, nothing. I mean, you just show up. We used to get our uniforms at Stars Clothing, and a guy named Ray Mason, who was a sergeant at the time, my first day, show up, Sergeant Mason will get your uniform, so drives me to Stars Clothing and gives me a tour of the county and gets me a couple of shirts and a couple of pairs of pants. They give me a badge. I have to borrow a gun and a belt from another guy I knew who was already working. And that was it. Show up. Now, to work in the jail, you gotta, you know, there's a much more rigorous screening and hiring process. And then there's an academy, and then on-the-job training with a training officer that goes on for months before you're allowed to work by yourself. And the same for patrol officers. It's much more structured, a lot more training. Before you're allowed to be out there by yourself, there's a lot more that you're required to know and a lot more that you're required to show that you know.
What sort of interactions did you have with inmates? I mean, did it change from when you were, you know, a college kid patrolling in Stars Clothing to later on, or was it?
Yeah. Well, when I started, my experience in the jail was just on the graveyard shift, on the 10:30 to at night till 7 in the morning. So really the most interaction I had was to occasionally patrol the cell block to look and see if everybody was breathing, and booking people in. And most of the people we booked in were drunk, and a lot of them wanted to fight. So that, you know, for a young kid, that was okay. Now the jail staff works extensively with the inmates. Instead of the old style jail that we had was referred to as a remote supervision jail, where the officers are outside of the cell block area and just look in to do any supervision and have limited contact. The new jail, in fact, the jail at 6th and Canyon and now the jail out on Airport Road are called direct supervision jails, which means that for each module of inmates, or pod, whatever term you want to use, there's an officer assigned who's in there and in direct face-to-face contact with the inmates. There's an officer in there 24 hours a day. So that's a huge difference. And we had to learn all about, well, and we not only learned, but we pioneered some of those practices. Boulder County was, the National Jail Center was in Boulder County for a long time over in Longmont, run by the National Institute of Corrections, and they used our jail as a model to bring people from around the country to teach them about direct supervision jails. So, good on us.
Are you allowed to have a gun in direct supervision jails? Are you allowed to have a gun as an officer within the population?
No.
You're just
officers in the jail don't carry any weapons.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the chances of having it taken away are far outweigh any benefit that you get from having a weapon inside the jail.
Right.
So it's no weapons inside the secure perimeter of the jail.
It's interesting. I didn't really know very much about jails at all. Going back to your experiences with Wildland Fire, can you tell me what it was like a year ago tomorrow? Or a year ago on Sunday, actually.
Oh, yeah.
No, just kidding. Not even a year. That's
Year
September
ago.
11th. That's 10 years ago.
Tuesday.
September 11th. A year ago last Tuesday.
Yeah, September 6th. Well, I've been retired for a while, and we still got a high school kid at home, and it was her birthday, so we call it her birthday fire. But we were taking her and one of her friends out to the friend's home in Gun Barrel that morning, and I was driving out east and looking at the sky, and it just doesn't look right. It doesn't look right. Is that haze? What is that? Oh my God, that is the biggest fire I've ever seen. And it was it was a 90-degree day, less than 10% humidity. It'd been dry for a long time, and the wind was blowing out of the west at 20 to 40 miles an hour. And the smoke was just being driven like I'd never seen. It was definitely windier than the Black Tiger Fire. The Black Tiger Fire, the wind was more out of the south than the west. So I was thankful that I was retired that day.
What did you do for the rest of the day? Do you remember?
No, at one point I went up on Flagstaff. There's a trail that I'd like to hike up there where you can see that area, and I went up there and hiked up on the trail where I could see what was going on. And it was incredible.
Do you find yourself responding to crises despite the fact that you're, like, I guess, a civilian now, of someone who's no longer involved in law enforcement?
No.
No.
I'm retired. Yeah. I work as a volunteer with homeless people a lot, so I got a lot of experience dealing with people that applies to that. But I'm on the board of the Carriage House, and helping them find a new building. That's a big challenge. Something else that we did after I took office as sheriff, we'd had the Black Tiger and we had the Beaver Lake and the Old Stage Fire. That was in 1990. That was another pretty scary one. Lost it, 14 12, 14 homes, something like that in that one. But I pulled a group of people together, our fire management people and a number of the volunteer fire departments, City of Boulder Fire Department, and we got some faculty from the University of Colorado together, and we held a couple of wildfire symposiums, community symposiums on wildfire, and talked about the ecology of the forests and how things had changed and why, what could be done to help prevent fire. It was kind of the forerunner of these community wildfire protection plans. We did one of these symposiums every year for about 3 or 4 years in the early 90s, and got communities started on a lot of mitigation efforts, got the county to do a lot of mitigation work in their open space lands. And I'm convinced that kept that Walker Ranch fire in 2000, the fact that a lot of work had been done on the county lands, it's where the fire stopped, is where the mitigation work had been done in county open space. And I'm convinced that kept that fire from destroying any homes. So that was, I'm glad I haven't done that.
And we've talked a little bit about how the environment has, changed since you've lived in Boulder County and its effect on wildland fire, and then also the changes that you instigated within the department. Could you tell me how you feel like wildland fire has evolved in Boulder County or in general?
Well, you go back to the late 18th century, the early late 19th century, early 20th century. We know there were devastating fires in those days. There was one that burned from Ward past Gold Hill. And then we had a pretty long period without a lot of fires. and during that time, there were the operating paradigm was to stomp out every fire as soon as you could, and there wasn't any thought given to mitigating fire risk at all. So by the time the late 1980s, early 90s rolled around, this whole county was tinderbox, and any little thing, whether it was lightning or human causes, with the right conditions, those very hot days, the low humidity and winds, fire was set to go, and sometimes the only thing that would stop it would be rain or snow. So, tremendous number of homes have been built in the mountains in the last 60 years, and unfortunately a lot of those burned last year. What I see now is that in the Sugarloaf fire, of those 44 homes, most of those were rebuilt. For the 4 Mile fire, with 169 homes that were burned, what I hear today is that only a handful of those are being rebuilt. So we'll see, see what the future holds. That some of the areas where that fire burned are going to be ugly for a long time. Areas where the Black Tiger fire burned seem like it's a little bit different. They seem like some of those are areas where you can have a natural experience, and the meadows are just as good as the forest used to be. But I don't know what it's going to be like in the 4 Mile fire area. If grasses are going to reclaim that, or people are going to move back, what's going to happen?
It seems like you learned a lot from being involved in the Gold Hill fire and then the Black Tiger fire and the Beaver Lake fire in terms of communication, and sort of administrating those fires. Do you think going ahead what do you think we can learn from the 4 Mile fire going ahead?
Well, I wasn't in there I wasn't directly involved, so it's a little hard for me to say. I think a lot of, I've talked to Joe Pelley, the current sheriff, but not in a lot of detail about it. Things work pretty well. The systems work pretty well. Radio systems are evolving, and you have to keep on top of that. The state's been pushing to put in this 800 megahertz digital trunked radio system everywhere, and it doesn't work very well in the mountains. I know they had some bad luck with their digital radios when those fires from New Mexico came up earlier this year up into Los Animas County around Trinidad. So they've got to figure out a way to make sure that they have adequate communications and not just accept a system that somebody that hasn't been there thinks will work. The incident command system that's being used is sound. It's after 9/11, that system was adopted by Homeland Security as the way to manage any major incident. And many more people have been trained in how to function in the incident command system. And I think that's helped a great deal. Communications is a challenge, and obviously planning for mitigation is important, but you can't cut down all the trees to save them. So I don't know what's going to happen there.
As someone who's worked with fire departments in Boulder County, and especially the volunteer fire departments up in the mountains, how do you think that they affect the mountain communities in their relationship to Boulder County?
I don't know. The fire departments, I think, are the heart and soul of a lot of those communities. They're really the connecting link that links all the neighbors together, particularly when there's an emergency, medical, fire, rescue, whatever. Even law enforcement incidents, they help the sheriff's office, and I love those people.
Is there anything that you would like to talk about at all before we end the interview?
Well, I haven't really talked about, I know your focus is wildland fire, but one of the biggest challenges that sheriffs face is running the jails. And there are so many factors that are thought to be beyond their control that funnel people into jails. I probably spent more of my time working at the 12 years or 13 years I was sheriff. I spent more time working on jail issues than any other single area. It's costly both in terms of dollars and in human lives to get a lot of people locked up. Not all of them being locked up is doing anybody any good. We need to continue to work on better ways to figure that stuff out. One of the big frustrations is that you got somebody that's in trouble. There's often so many different people telling them what to do, and they're not talking to each other. And we worked hard to try to break down those kind of barriers. Developed a program called PACE for mentally ill people getting out of jail, because for years they were just coming right back in and costing taxpayers lots of money and not doing them any good at all. So we developed this program to put together a team that included a probation officer, a mental health counselor, addictions counselor, a case manager, and a nurse. And this team managed a group of 30 or 40 mentally ill offenders. We found we were able to reduce the total costs for jail by about 80% by having them living on their own and reporting as a condition of their probation after getting out of jail, reporting to this team that worked together and constantly communicated with each other, rather than the old model of everybody being in their different office and telling the ex-offender what to do and not coordinating.
What percentage of offenders were mentally ill?
Oh, when we started that program, it had been climbing. It depends on what your definition of mentally ill is, but if it's ever having been diagnosed with some mental illness, it sometimes runs around 40%. So it's a big problem.
Mm-hmm. Is that something that you find yourself working on continually, even
Yeah.
though you're retired? Or?
Yeah. Yep.
What sort of things have you been doing?
Well,
or is it just something that you just continually think about because it's been
well,
your career?
you know, there's some overlap between the offender population and the homeless population, and I found myself working in that area and trying to develop programs and trying to get people to work together and for greater efficiency, effectiveness, and access.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you for talking to me this evening.
Well, you're welcome.
It's been illuminating.
Okay. Happy to share.